It is my honor to introduce our next speaker, Laura Lederer. Laura founded and directed the Protection Project at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government in 1997. From 2001 to 2009, she served as senior advisor on trafficking in persons to Undersecretary of State for Democracy and Global Affairs, Paula Dobriansky, and then senior director of global projects in the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons at the U.S. Department of State. From 2001 to 2009, she was executive director of the Senior Policy Operating Group on Trafficking in Persons, a high-level interagency policy group that staffed the President's cabinet-level interagency task force on trafficking in persons. She has been at this work for a while. In 1998, she was awarded the Gustavus Myers Center for Study of Human Rights Annual Award for Outstanding Work on Human Rights, one of among a number of awards. In 2008, Laura founded Global Centurion, a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating modern slavery by focusing on the demand side of the problems, the perpetrators, exploiters, buyers, and end users of human beings seeking to prevent modern slavery at its source. Under her leadership, GC has developed significant demand-focused research and programs. And I know demand is a question that a lot of us have had today, how that's being addressed. Provided cutting-edge education, awareness, and advocacy training to communities and civic leaders, NGOs, law enforcement, and at-risk populations on demand, and established leading partnerships and collaborative networks to respond to modern slavery. Let's welcome Laura Lederer.
All right, thank you so much. So very glad to be here and be a part of this conversation. Really a first, I think, in terms of bringing together these parallel movements of civil rights and anti-trafficking work. And my colleague John Richmond said that in the Justice Department, anti-trafficking work is civil rights work, but practically speaking on the ground, I think we haven't experienced that. And so this is really a very important conversation, and I hope we will broaden and deepen it. I hope I'm not even gonna talk 9 minutes, but I wanted to just raise a few questions, deepen the conversation a little bit, and hopefully, work to move us forward. But before I do that, I also wanted to thank Brooke Bello for her wonderful talk today. I have said for a long time that this needs to be a survivor-led and survivor-centered movement because they know the hell of this more than any of us. And so we need the professionals, yes, and we need survivors to help, and we need that collaborative and cooperative work together. So thank you for that, Brooke. I usually start with a story of a survivor, but we've heard those, and so we don't need to do that today. I want to talk a little bit about this triangle of activity that makes up human trafficking, and how we focused on one or another side of the triangle of activity to the exclusion of the other sides, and how we need to begin to bring all of that together. That triangle of activity is very much like drug trafficking and arms trafficking: supply, demand, and distribution. And you can't have human trafficking if you don't have the supply, the men, women, and children who are being bought and sold and traded, and the distributors, who are the traffickers, who are in this for the money and would do something else if they weren't able to make so much money on this. But what is fueling that? What is making that triangle work is the demand side, the buyers, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking or organ trafficking. Those who purchase are the ones who are fueling this market. And when we are working on one side or another to the exclusion of these sides, we're missing the opportunity to attack this in a holistic way, and that's what needs to happen. When we started this work, so I've been doing this work for 15, 20 years. We were focused on the victim side, and our law is called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Why? Because we needed to convince people that this was actually a problem. And so we brought to Congress to tell their stories. We brought victims and survivors to tell what had happened to them from all over the world, to testify, to tell their first-person stories. And hence we got this Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was focused on the rescue and restoration of the victims. And then we began to build shelters, and we began to talk about a set of comprehensive services that would work for these, tailored for the experience of these victims. But after we'd been doing that for about 5 years, so the Trafficking Victims Protection Act passed in the year 2000, some of us started to say we could be rescuing victims forever, both here in the United States and around the world, and rehabilitating and restoring and reintegrating them into society. And there'll be more victims and more victims and more victims. And so we have to look at this in a deeper way. And hence we began to say, well, we've been focused on the rescue and restoration. We need to focus on the prosecution. That's the distributors. These guys are making a lot of money. Some people say as much as $150 billion per year. We need to focus on that. And so we began to put pressure on the Department of Justice to bring these cases. And we've now had over 1,000 cases. I was just asking John how many exactly. I think it's about 1,000 some cases that have been successfully prosecuted. And then we started to say, but wait a second, we can be prosecuting these cases forever unless we get to that demand side. Who are these purchasers who are willing to go into the streets and purchase young women and children, maybe some not so young? I've been doing this work on interviewing survivors of human trafficking, and my youngest interview was with a 14-year-old. My oldest was with a 60-year-old. So, but who are they? Who are these men who would be interested in doing that, and why? So this triangle of activity, supply, demand, distribution, follows another triangle, because people often say to me, what's the root cause of trafficking? Well, it's poverty. If there weren't so many poor people, if we could just solve the problem of poverty and do some economic development, then we would be able to solve this problem. Well, poverty is only one part of the problem. The other part of the triangle is greed and exploitation. And so you've got the poverty, and there are many kinds of poverty. As Brooke said today, I mean, there's economic poverty, but there are many ways in which people are impoverished or made to be broken and hurt, and we have to be looking at all of those ways. But the greed is the traffickers. They are doing this for the money, as I said. The exploitation, that part of the triangle of activity, I don't think we understand why people exploit other people and what that is all about, and why men will purchase women and children. So what we need to be doing also is asking many more questions about what this triangle of activity consists of, and how we can actually attack and solve this. I also wanted to raise another complication, and I thought, Dr. Howard, you did a great job at just beginning to raise this question. When Brooke was showing her slides of really the evil people who have trafficked these young women and children, I've also been working now with street gangs and with the new sort of modus operandi of these street gangs who will send young men into Romeo, young women and children in middle schools, and then draw them in and then turn them around and turn them out into the streets. But oftentimes these young men have been hurt too. And they've been either forced into this life of crime when they were younger, or they've been born into families that are part of gangs, and that was the life that they knew. And if we want to get to the bottom of this, we really are going to need to begin to ask the question, who are the perpetrators? What's driving them? How did they get to be that way? And how can we solve this problem? And I think that the church is in a very good position to do that. The church has the ability to ask those questions in a way that government doesn't. Government is going to, pass laws, policy, prosecute, convict, but the church can get deeper and figure out what the root of this problem is and how to bring all God's children back to a wholeness. So that's basically what I wanted to say today, is that I think that this is a very deep problem, and it's important to figure out the good guys from the bad guys, but also let's now begin to move further and bring all of us into the equation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for blazing a path on this issue of demand that is not the most attractive issue to work. It's one of the more difficult spaces to work in this area. I was sharing with some at one of our breaks that Michelle and I, in addition to some of the domestic trafficking trips that we've done, spent some time in Thailand, both in Bangkok and in some of the rural villages, and met someone inspired by Laura's work and others, and is doing great work in Bangkok on trafficking, but is working with the Johns in the red light district. And honestly, when we first heard about this guy, we didn't really want to mess with that organization. It was a challenging thing for us to even think about, particularly as we had met some of the victims of both trafficking and sexual exploitation. We didn't really want to spend time with Chris Linty and the MST project because of the work that he was doing in the population that he served. But then we heard his presentation, and he talked about the depths of both depravity, but also brokenness and spiritual emptiness that he encountered when meeting some of these men. And that there are some that absolutely, lock them up, throw away the key. And there are others that you may need to do that too, but you also need to understand where they came from and try to dig deeply into their spirits and their souls so that they can be restored and not hurt any more people. And that was a super difficult conversation for me to even absorb, but a really, really important one. And it's something that I think as the church, rooted in the grace of God, we should at least be thinking and praying about our role in this space. So, Laura, thank you for the work that you do, and also want to speak the name Chris Linty from the MST Project into this room, and please check him out as well.